Hello and welcome to a new playthrough for the channel. This is Tinian the Forgotten Battle, designer Ross Mortel by Compass Games. I know what you're all thinking, it's not a GMT game, what's he doing? Well, I do play other games, though my previous replays have all been GMTs, and I do have quite a lot of GMT games, but this one's a Compass game. This is known as the company scale system, game system. There are four, and almost a fifth, I believe now, game in the series. This is number 4. The others, I believe, are Guam Return to Glory, Saipan the Bloody Rock, and Montelimar Anvil of Fate. And I think the fifth to come out will be on Novorossiysk, and I think it's called The Little Land, but it's not out yet. I purchased this game a little while ago, wanting to look into the system, and its big advantage over the others is it's much smaller. It's only a one mapper, so I can fit around it easily, and probably the easiest to get into the system. I believe Guam and Montelimar are actually 4 maps, and Saipan's 2. So this is much more ergonomic for me. As I understand it, you can actually attach the Saipan map to this Tinian map. So you can have both islands, if you like, as a big battle, which would be interesting to see, of course. Now, the system was invented, I suppose that's the word, from a guy called Adam Starkweather, who also, I believe, came up with the Grand Tactical System GTS with multi-man publishing games. Now, I haven't played that, so I have none of those games, so I can't provide you a comparison. Apparently they're related, if that really means anything to anybody. But I do know MMP games, and they're very big on game systems, so they have lots of games from individual systems, Napoleonic battle systems, operational combat series, things like that. And they have a very strong set of mechanics. And the rhythm of the game, I keep on going about the rhythm of the game, tends to be, a very strong rhythm is built, particularly for things like OCS games, operational combat series, where supply is so intricate, and there's a way of doing things. You can be very fluid about what you do, but the best way to do things is in a sort of procedural manner of getting things working. You get the system to work for you. I think this is fairly similar. Possibly GTS had that, and this has a similar feel, that there's a procedure to do things, that you use the mechanics in a certain sequence in a certain way to get the best out of it. And if you don't, then you're going to be fighting the system rather than fighting the opponent. Whereas things like ACS, etc., those operational level games, like Holland 44 as well, which you saw on the channel before, this one has the concept of orders, like Gallipoli. Those other games, that's abstracted out, and you get to move your units how you like, kind of thing. Whereas here, there's an order system, and there's actually a command system around it. And as we saw in, let's say the previous Fields of Fire, where the command system is practically half the game, and you can't really do anything without it. And also with Gallipoli, where we saw the order system again being a sort of a sub game here as well. This is more like what we saw with the Mets system, where it's a chip pull, but it's kind of a managed chip pull, and there are extra things put into the cup, and it is kind of the chip pull is kind of really central to the game, as opposed to just one of the mechanics. So it says it's a company scale series, and Yeah, interesting enough, this system seems to kind of miss out on battalions. Well, we saw battalions in Holland 44. We saw, you know, and this works at the company scale. So counters are companies, and then they are formed into regiments or regimental contact combat teams on the American side, particularly, and so that it kind of goes company as unit, collection of units, regiment, and then collection of regiments is a division, and battalions are kind of missed out. There's nothing particularly useful about doing things in battalions. It seems I can't see anything in that. So, for example, if in Holland 44, when you got the battalions of a division to work together, you've got bonuses here. It's in the regiments that you get those advantages, which is an interesting thing. The other thing is in this system is that the heavy weapons, the non-infantry, if you like, are used as asset attachments. I've seen this before in a lot of game systems, where you have the core infantry unit and you attach an asset to it or take it away to boost it. It's very useful. I've seen a lot of systems where heavy weapons are put into companies of their own, and they kind of wander the board as kind of conglomerates. Whereas quite often, as I've read, these weapons were sometimes passed out piecemeal between other units of the of the battalion or the regiment or whatever, and then recalled and then sent elsewhere where they were needed, where the higher commander thought that they would be useful. So this this is again quite an interesting thing to see here. This even actually in this game even corresponds to, on the American side, to tanks. So the tank battalions are, it's almost down to the field of fire level, is that you get teams of tanks as an asset attached to the infantry rather than a whole group of tanks doing their own thing, if you like, as a counter. The Japanese do have tank company counters. I think it's a couple, and they are independent. But with the American side, they're assets as much as heavy machine gun units, 80 gun units, flamethrower units, etc. These are all assets which you add and take away. So, I said earlier that it was about the command system. I think here is very interesting, and I want to just go through it again. I'm usually interested in this game rhythm idea, and the command system here actually controls that. It controls how the whole game works and sets that rhythm. So I kind of want to go through it in a little bit of detail. You see, my intros are not necessarily just go through the rules and just go through the components and let's get on with it. I like to have that kind of meta information out of the game. Gives people more of a sense of how the game's playing rather than having to pick it up through the replay and to see whether it's something useful to watch or useful to purchase or whatever. So as I mentioned before, it's a chip pool system. You put chits in a cup, very much like Metz and Gallipoli was previous replays. And also, the Fields of Fire had a very strong command system as well. As this is more at the Metz end, where you're putting chits in the cup, drawing them out with extra chits which do bigger game things that are not relevant to a particular formation. But there's a little bit more granularity in it, and the chip pool is much more important, I think, than the other games, Metz and Gallipoli, that used it. The reasons why I say it's a bit more intricate is you can kind of trump the system So not only do you just have chits like in mechs, you buy chits like in well, kind of like in Gallipoli, but then you can also buy chits during the actual action phase of the game to enhance. You can buy stuff you didn't buy before if you have enough what's known as dispatch points to do it. There is also a concept of what's known as direct commands. So not only do you activate units as units, but then a little bit like the general initiative card pull in Fields of Fire, you get to do other things. You can reactivate counters on a one-for-one basis, whether they're in command or not. And so the combination of buying chits, having set chits always come up in a turn anyway, which have administrative or sort of higher command functions, and then have the ability to add to that during the turn, and also have this direct command function as well, which allows you to get down to the individual unit level and get them to do things extra. It means that whole command system is quite important. Interestingly enough, there is a command rate. There are HQs in the game, and there is a command radius. Although I don't think it's wholly critical about that command range. There are certain points where it's important, but it's not absolutely necessary for the HQs to be within range of all its units. I think in Tinian, particularly with the beach landing, the HQs don't make an appearance for a while, and there are relevant, or there are, can I say, deadly consequences for the HQ not being around. But it's not. It doesn't kind of cramp the style of actually using the units in combat, which is interesting. So that it's more the system and less than the actual what's on the ground as far as a command situation is. Kind of like that Holland 44 idea that your HQs are there, to give you extra things, and you kind of have to stay with them, or you get out of supply. One thing in this game is supply is really abstract, very much like Mets, not like Gallipoli where supply was critical, and that's a big difference between the two games here. The supply is part of the command system, so that HQ range, etc., and also some special rules as well. For example, on Tinian, the Japanese artillery didn't have a lot of artillery shells to fire. They were in shortage, so therefore they are restricted from firing. But that's the whole game, and there's nothing they can do about it. That just is what it is. So there are these fixed rules which give you those supply constraints, such as they are. But in general, as the game plays, supply is kind of not a consideration. You don't have to trace back and all that kind of stuff, and that's just not here. So let's have a look at some of the components here, particularly the map. So the map's your traditional hex wargame style with terrain color coded on it. Interesting point with this map though is these little dots which are at the centre of each of the hexagons. They're color coded so that you know what the terrain is. If there's overlap or if there's any ambiguity, you know exactly what the terrain type is. So for example, this is sugarcane, this is rocky, and so this is marsh here. So that's a nice feature. So there's no argument, which can happen with tactical games, particularly with the artwork kind of spilling over. It is quite clear anyway. I'm not sure it's 100% necessary, but it's nice. It makes things a lot easier. So the terrain types, just like pretty much all Grand Tactical games and most games, but this one particular gives you a bonus on defense, of course, a defense modifier in combat, amount of movement points to move through, and also our old friend line of sight and the blockage of line of sight depending on the terrain type. So we're back in Gallipoli territory, which I kind of almost sidestepped because it was very, very complicated. This suffers from a little bit of a similar problem, but it's not quite so bad. Firstly, there's not that many hexes. It's not as intricate, the terrain, so it's not so tough. There's a few interesting things I haven't seen before here. One thing that is a holdover from something like Gallipoli is there is hexside terrain as well. So we have slopes. Slopes are these are white. Can I see? Yeah, these are these white features here on the hex side. You have steep slopes, which are here. The red versions of those slope hex sides there, and you have cliffs. I can't see a cliff actually here. So they have an effective LOS, of course. The other interesting thing in here, and it's covered by, this is a previous just run through the game for my own purposes, just learning the game here. Up here, this is quite interesting here, is that we have this little symbol here, which is an observation point. So that's kind of a position where you should be able to see pretty much everything from there. And so it kind of gets rid of all the LOS problems from that. There's only one exception, which is these steep slopes here, in that one hex beyond you won't be able to see from the observation point. Other than that, you can see where you like, and that's an interesting point. I haven't seen that before, the concept of an observation point, which is the good place to be. To match the map, of course, we have the traditional terrain effects chart here. So it gives you these dots here to be able to code, and also what the hex will look like anywhere. Then you've got 3 movement point costs: leg, wheeled, or tracked. They're color coded for the movement factor on the counter, so you can tell whether they're a leg, wheeled, or tracked unit. Almost all of them are leg. Then a decision whether it's blocking terrain or not. Interesting thing here, we've got this note 1 here. This is for sugarcane and brush, of which we have quite a bit on the Tinian map. Now, they don't block LOS. However, if you have more than one of those terrain type in the LOS, then it does block. So you get a free hex to look through, but then the second one will actually block. So more than, given the map here, if you see, there's a lot of sugarcane here. Things like that observation point now becomes very, very useful in those instances. There is another instance when brush and sugarcane essentially become transparent, and that is through any number of hexes, and that's if you're firing on a naval zone. The naval zones are, if I bring the camera around here, these are the landing, organised landing zones for the American units. So units can look through sugarcane and brush hexes to get to those points, presumably because they're you're able to. They've been positioned. Units have been positioned so they can see out to sea, and that's quite interesting. Not much else to talk about really. The naval zones themselves, there are usually 3 or 4. This one has 4. So we have a transport zone, an approach zone, reef zone, final run-in zone. So units start, of course, in the transport zone and they move down. You can see this one is a blank because the reef zone isn't actually a place where you put counters, it's a place where you move counters through. And so it's an opportunity to fire, and actually it's kind of the best place for defending units to fire at incoming units, because you get a better terrain effects modifier for the attacker at that point. You run into the beach, and then these link on these arrows. I think other ones in the series, you then do dice rolls. You might actually drift to other beach hexes, but this is straight ahead. If we zoom out to the entire map, this is not the only beach landing hex you use. It was the one that was used historically, and as you can see through here, if I remove these, there are other boxes and also quite a few south. You can see just underneath that chart there. So I suppose in a free landing scenario, you can plan your own free landing plan. But for our scenario, we're going to stick with historical as we usually do, like I did with Gallipoli. So yeah, that's most of what I want to say about the map for the moment. Don't want to go into too much detail. And just interesting, we have these airfields here, which the airstrips are actually a terrain as well. But it's mostly either rocky or sugarcane. Is the terrain types. The next thing I want to look at is the sequence of play before I do the counters. Now, there's three main parts to a game turn, and it's not, as I say, because there's a chip pull, there isn't a sort of I go, you go, there isn't a Japanese turn, an American turn. There's a combined action phase. You have the prep phase, which is kind of like the command phase, to be honest. But what you run through is once a day we check for weather determination and for fatigue. Fatigue is a concept of reducing the morale of your units. This is done by division. Each division has what's known as a troop quality, and that troop quality kind of starts at maximum, can't get better, but can get a lot worse, and fatigue points are what provide that. And it's going to be interesting because we're going to do the scenario 1, which is just the first day. However, I'm going to kind of record on the side the fatigue points, because in the scenario in scenario 1, the scenario will say don't use fatigue. But I might want to continue, and I kind of want to, rather than actually populate the entire map and run the full scenario, I kind of want to zoom in on the first day scenario, and then find out a way of actually morphing into the bigger scenario if I just want to continue going. So fatigue points are going to be not official but unofficially kept for the scenario. We have two wonderful counters here. And before we get the counters and go out in detail, there's these two guys here, which are known as Sochu and Martini. And yep, they're alcohol. So effectively they're just re-roll chits, and you get one re-roll per day. So if you get something really, really bad that knocks your entire position as a really bad roll, then you can use that chit. So again, these are the first three here are day, the beginning of day only, the 0500 turn. The turns are 2 hours long, so 0500, then to 7, 9, 11, 1, 3 and 5 o'clock, and then there's two night turns, a bit like the condensed night turns in Gallipoli. Once you've done those, so the true start of every turn is spending dispatch points. So dispatch points allow you to buy formations to go into the cup. Now, formations are either one of two levels. They're either at that regiment level, and they're known as formation chits, or they're at the divisional level. And the formation level costs you 1 dispatch point to put into the cup, and a divisional costs you 2. So both sides put the it's a combined chit pool, and so they put into the cup what they're paying for, and then once they've used those dispatch points, there will be a fatigue penalty because of putting those chits into the cup, but you're going to be using those units. After that, you actually roll to see if you get more dispatch points, and you roll against a dispatch rating, and it's very good for the Americans and not very good for the Japanese. If you roll equal to or less than, you get 3 dispatch points. If you don't, you get 1. So you always get 1 anyway, but as you can see, getting 1 dispatch point gets you a formation, to activate, and that's your lot. And then finally, you put in your reinforcements on that you like. And that's your preparation done. You're on to the action phase, which is kind of the meat of the turn. It's almost 99% of the turn. So we, of course, put stuff in the cup. We have several other chits that we put into the cup that come, that always appear. And then we will get into the actual action phase part, which is part C here. And the initial part of part C is that the initiative player, usually the Americans in this game, have the option of paying 2 dispatch points to put in to actually activate a chit which they didn't activate. They didn't actually pay to activate before, and it costs 2 points. Again, interesting subtle thing here is that it costs 2 points to put a division into the cup, but to pick the chit out once you hadn't paid for it costs you 2 as well. So on the division side, is it worth putting a division into the cup? Wouldn't you rather wait and pick it out yourself at the beginning of the turn? That's an interesting thing there. You can actually, it's incorrect. You can't put a division chit in. You can't pay for a division chit. It has to be a formation chit. So scrub that. I was talking rubbish. So only formation chits, and they will cost 2. So they cost twice as much if you're going to actually pick them straight off the bat. After that, you just pick chits. So there's several chits here. As I say, most of them are outlined here are the ones that are there every turn. And then you've got the formation or division chit section here. So a wind chit, you remove all barrage and illumination round markers from the map, so the wind just carries away all the smoke and things that the wind is subject to. What also they do is you check to see whether fires actually spread, and there are fires in this game. You have a naval support chit, of course it's only American, and they have they're effectively extra artillery, if you like. And then you've got an air support chit, which is not quite like artillery. They're like direct fire, extra counters. Naval support chit, you've always got a fixed number. Air support chit, although you do actually roll on the chart, and you may get none, but the chit is always there. Of course, naval and air support chits aren't available overnight for pretty understandable reasons. You have a random event chit which you draw, and I've done that a couple of times, and I think with the exception of one random event, you roll a dice and look on a table. They're all bad for the Americans. There's one that's really good, and the rest are variously horrible. But some good, some bad, some really bad, and that's a chit to avoid. But it's always there, and you always have to roll on that table, so you're not going to get no event happening. That's an interesting thing, is that one of these things will happen, as opposed to, well, there's a chance of something happening. Not sure if I agree with that. There might not be something random happening, but yeah, that's what it has in the rules. Then you have any formation chits or division chits here. So within here, you follow a certain sequence, and I'll zoom in here for you easily to follow here. So you can move all your leaders in the activated formation or division. So leaders are bonus chits, but bonus counters, which you were assigned to units of that formation or division, and you can kind of teleport them really to wherever you want them to be, so they can zip around. Very nice. You can attach support weapons, and we'll go through when we go on the counters what those look like. You can then move support weapons from the allocating box to the available box. So there's the off charts, which are off map charts, which I'll show you. And when you take away a support weapon, it goes into the reallocating box, and then on the next activation, you can move it to the available box, and then you can put it somewhere else. So that's kind of, this is like a delay out of, miss a turn kind of thing for the support weapon counter. And then of course you can detach support weapons, so you can take them off and put them in the reallocating. So you're kind of doing it in a reverse. You attach available, you then shift reallocating to available, and then you take support weapons off and put them in reallocating. That's that kind of sequence there. So that covers here. Then you remove concentrated markers, sustained fire markers, and opportunity markers. So these are fire combat effects, which at the start of an activity you remove them off the units. Now after that, you can change the status of each individual unit in the activity, deployed or column. I'll show that on the counters, but effectively with a deployed unit, you fire better, but you can't move. On column, you don't fire very well, if at all, and you can move, and it's what state you want them to be in, and you flip them over. Again, go back to, for example, things if you know at the OCS system where you have a move mode and a combat mode, it's kind of like that, but actually a bit more extreme, as in move, no move. So you decide all of those units, or for all the units, what mode they're going to be in for the turn. You then perform any assaults or banzai charges. So assaults happen first. Assaults you have to declare the turn before. You can't just say, right, he just charges at him and let's roll and see what happens. You actually designate a hex for assaults, and then anything adjacent which will then jump in the next activation. So that's why these the assaults happen early in the activation, in that those are all resolved before you do anything else. Then you prepare any new, you place any new assaults that you're going to do for your next activation at that point. Only after you've done that can you then activate units to do what they need to do. There are 4 things you can do. You can move, you can fire, you can do an engineering activity. Mostly this is things like building fortifications, foxholes, etc. Or you can rally, and you'll mostly be doing the other 3, not so much engineering. Now, you can only do one thing in that activation, and that's your lot. Except now, during this activation, at the end of you moving and doing actions and doing things with your unit, you can actually pay direct command, direct commands, I suppose, to actually get individual units to go again. And this is where I mentioned before about there's this kind of trumping of the system, and this is one of the instances here, is that if you have direct commands, you will get more every turn. It's actually in the direct command sheet bit down here. You can actually get units to perform a second action, and that can be the same thing. You could do the same thing again. Interestingly enough, this is the point where the idea of in command comes in. So if you're in command of a command range of an HQ, or you're in or adjacent to a leader, remember leaders and HQs are different units here, you can do this. If you aren't, you can't. And that's kind of your traditional command range thing in a nutshell, is what it affects. So again, subtly important, that about being in command. Finally, you check for overstacking. Stacking is 3 units, 3 companies in a hex. If you have more than that, you will become disorganized, and that's what you do there. Once everything's done, you then check that. And that's your activation chit. That's the main thing of what you'll be doing. Then we have the direct command chit here. So there's 1 for each side in the check cup. When you pull it out, you roll to see how many direct commands you add to your total. You have a little bank of them, and you roll a dice, D10. Everything's a D10 in this game. You roll a dice, halve it, round down, and then you add the command rating. And again, The Americans have got a very good command rating, the Japanese not so good, so they tend to get a lot more a lot more commands. Once you have that boost, you then can activate units at a cost of 1 direct command per unit, a bit like the second activation inside a formation activation chit usage. So, but this doesn't have the in command bit, so you can get anybody to do anything. They're one particular activity, they're one particular action you can do across the board. So that's the major kind of trumping thing. So we've seen 3 here. One is that you can basically pick a chit out that you didn't pay for it now, and play it and trump what's in the chit cup. You can do this extra direct command to get units in a formation to get a second go, and then you've got this direct command chit itself, in which you can order anybody to do anything, just one action, across the map. So that's the action phase. You just go around with your chits until you run out of chits in the cup. As usual, like Gallipoli, etc. So that's it. Of course, you do have a final ability to purchase a formation chit, like you did at the start of each action phase, to say, actually, no, I'm going to jump somebody in that I didn't pay for before, and you can do that. Then you have a small end phase, which is Gyokusai is like a mass Banzai charge, which I don't think occurs in this game. Then you check your vector conditions, check you've run out of time, and then you take the return marker, a record marker, and move it up 1 spot, and that's your turn. That's the turn sequence. Hope that's relatively clear. Hope I've kind of shown you a little bit of the nuance, particularly in the action phase of what to do here. And let's move on to the counters. Right, let's have a look at these counters now. Up the top here, if we zoom in, these are the chits you can pick. There's a Marine Division activation there. That's a formation activation. The formations will have a band on their titles, which will denote, in the top. Sorry, that's upside down. So at the top, it will denote which formation it is. But the division ones won't. They'll just have the divisional marker. For example, here's effectively a divisional one here. This is the Imperial Army activation. It's the fact that in Tinian, everything in the Imperial Army counts as one division. We have the direct command counter here. American Japanese there. Air support counter, amphibious movement counter, and navy support counter there, and then our 2 wind and event other chits that come through. So that's what goes in the cup, and pick them out. If we actually have a look at the other counters here, so what's going on the board, then here on the left we have our companies. So it's an American company. You've got the designation. Band denotes the regiment they're part of, the regimental combat team, and the same thing here. There's a regiment with the Imperial Army here with the red band. So for example, down here we've got this anti-tank gun here. So that's got that black band, which would correspond with the activation chit, so that's part of the 56 NGF. As far as the counter itself goes, if we go closely, we have the combat factor, and the box is relevant for what type of combat factor it is. So a red is small arms. There is black, which is indirect fire. You have yellow, which is high explosive, and then you can have blue, which is anti-tank. There is another colour which is white, and white is a yellow and blue combined. You can fire high explosive or anti-tank, your choice, kind of thing is the idea, and it's all about which part of the combat results table you use. Over here is the movement factor. As you can see, that's a no, so there's no movement allowed. This is a deployed unit, If we flip it over, here we have the column side of it. So it's the same unit. We have a smaller combat factor. We have an extra factor here which wasn't on the other side. The other side, it was 0. In fact, it was a blank. They don't have it. That's actually the defense value. So negative is good for the unit, positive is bad. And we have the movement factor appears at that point. And of course, we have the same thing with the Japanese unit. As you can see, this one has a -1 on its deployed side as a defense factor. And if we switch it over, it's got a 0. So it's harder to hit whatever side it's on than an American unit equivalent. Here we have this anti-tank gun unit. The only difference here we see is it actually has a little marker next to it, a little number next to it called an 8. That's the range of the device. So normally, if there isn't that range factor, the range is 1. If there is that number, then it's range whatever it is then. Then we have our extra units, if you like. There's the HQ here. Again, there's a banding here. White band is very important. White band denotes a sort of higher divisional level, as opposed to the coloured bands, which are regiment level, as you saw on these 3. So that counts for the division level. There are also no band units, like you can see here. There's no band on this, which is effectively a sort of free form unit. Can stack and can cooperate with any particular unit of that whole colour there. And we see an American one here. There's two values here on the leader's sides. So the +1 is, of course, +1 in combat. And there's no colour in the box. It's clear, if you like, which means it doesn't change anything. It's just exactly the same as whatever unit it's with. Here we have, of course, small arms, and this actually has a range, an HQ range here. So how many hexes its command radius is. Heroes are kind of leaders that just appear at random, pseudo-random, and of course they have effects here, like as you see here. There's also a defense value here, which is interesting as well for the hero. Anything in this sort of bluey purple is American, and the yellow is, unsurprisingly, the Japanese. So those are just general markers for the 2 different sides. This green is kind of Marines, I suppose, as other American units which aren't Marines would be a slightly different colour. But the general Allied colour is this sort of purple colour. Then we have support weapons. Support weapons here is an HMG. It's got the coloured band so that it actually is owned by a particular regimental combat team or formation. And it has a +1 here, so it adds +1 to the combat. Again, it's small arms. It's a support weapon, so it has this SW. That's how you can tell that they're support weapons. And this other symbol here, interestingly enough, that's the sustained fire symbol. That means that whatever unit is attached to can do sustained fire, which means they can fire multiple times, although you might actually break the HMG, but it's just an enabler here. On the back, there is nothing on here. There's no deployed side. You just actually attach it to a unit and it moves with it. This is an artillery piece here. So white denotes divisional level. It's got that range value, and as you can see, they can go quite a long way. And of course, there's a deployed side. The deployed side, of course, the indirect fire disappears because it's just the guys with their pistols and carbines or whatever. And that's it. Note, interestingly, this one has a no factor, so it can't even move in deployed. That means that it needs vehicles to help it move about. Here, and that's actually not an asset, actually. That should have been over here with the others. And here we have a flamethrower, again, coloured band. Adds +1 to the combat and has a yellow symbol. So it means that if you have a flamethrower with an infantry unit, which is normally red, like here, if you fire a flamethrower with them, it can change the colour to yellow. So it changes it to high explosive rather than rather than small arms, and so therefore you get a better table rolling. Support weapon again. It's worse on your defense value, of course, because the flamethrower, the fuel, etc. And there's this symbol here, which means it can cause a fire when it fires. Moving on, there's two particular allied counters here. There's a task force counter for the naval fire and the air support marker here as well. So the task force here, it's a 7-factor. It can go anywhere on the map. That's what the infinity symbol is here. However, if it's not being spotted for on the ground by a unit, then it actually is only 3 firepower factors, and in that case you're being spotted for an aircraft, but the not only is the firepower factor less, but you do have to roll for which hex it lands in. You have like a sort of rosette of the 6 hexes, and 0 to 3 it lands in the target hex, and all the others there's a sort of ring of hexes it will land in, so you don't really necessarily don't even hit the thing you're asking for. Air support, interesting thing here is +1 DC, so you have to spend a direct command even if you're given the air support marker with your air support roll. You still need to spend a direct command from whatever formation is relevant, but it is 6 firepower and it's a white, so the white is one of those choice units. Is it high explosive or is it armor piercing? Your choice as you use it. These don't stay on the board, they come in and come off as you get the navy support or the air support chit coming in. There were some markers up here, which are enhancements and markers for the units. So concentrate fire, you can forego the use of opportunity fire to being able to fire against units moving around you by adding a +1, and you put this marker on, and your combat factor is +1 for the rest of the turn until your next activation. Actually quite useful in the just getting those odds up a bit. And no opportunity fire is when you do opportunity fire. That is, if a unit moves around, within your fire zone, which is the combination of your LOS and your range, you can then fire on them, and then you put this marker on again, move it, and you remove it in the next activation. You only get one chance at an opportunity fire. Note that opportunity fire very different in this system than others. You get an opportunity fire for leaving a hex, not entering a hex. And remember, in Gallipoli, there was kind of leaving the hex, possibly entering the hex. Choose which one you want. Here, it's leaving the hex. So when you move up to a unit, say that has a 1 range, it's not going to opportunity fire as you close with it. From 2 hexes away to 1 hex away. There is an exception, that's for the beach run-in. So over here, I'll just move the camera around. So when you move from this box to the beach, you effectively take the terrain of where you're ending up rather than the naval box, which is more advantageous. The beach is a 0, whereas the final running zone is a -2. But that's opportunity fire, and then we have sustained fire, which I showed you with the HMG here. Can give you that extra bonus as well for firing more than once, which the opportunity fire thing will stop. Gives you that extra ability to break that convention. Okay, so on the second tier here, these are more markers, which you'll see on the board. Over here first, we've got the bombardment and barrage markers. So there are 4 levels of barrage, and they're effectively a result of indirect fire. So depending on how strong, unmodified the fire is, if it's a 2, then it becomes a smoke counter. If it's a 3, it's light. If it's a 4, it's medium. If it's a 5, it's heavy barrage. And these actually land in the hex no matter what the actual dice roll was. So they're a kind of additional thing that indirect fire will give you. Makes indirect fire really, really important. And note things like there are no's here and half movement, so it actually restricts your movement and also restricts how you your fire capability. Interesting enough, also is that they are, of course, block LOS, but they also reduce the range of units under these counters to just the one hex next door. So they can't do more than one range. They can only see what's adjacent to them. And of course, you can't see through them as well. The bombardment one, this is a special counter. This is a version of the heavy barrage, I suppose. That's not got a minus on it. That's got a 3 on it, and that's a 3 which is actually an indirect fire at the start of the game. So you place bombardment markers in the initial landing, and they are effectively stay there for the whole turn. Now these barrage markers and smoke markers, they actually last until the wind chit is pulled in the turn. When the wind chit is pulled, you clear them all out. Bombardment marker actually lasts for the whole actual chronological turn and then move. Effectively, you can't do things like rally, and you're kind of stuck under these. You can't really do anything while the bombardment is actually happening. It's a set bombardment from all the naval assets out at sea. Moving on from them, you've got extra terrain fortification markers. So foxholes here again. The yellow and the purple for whose side you're on, kind of thing, gives you a defense value bonus here. So as you can see, it changes the defense value. Pillbox here also has a troop quality bonus as well, so it makes your rolls against troop quality a lot better. And then we have mines, of which there's a whole bunch of them, and you place them at random. Well, you don't know what they are in the particular hexes you ask for. We'll see one of those in the first scenario, and you flip it over when you land on it, and it attacks you. That's the mine count, and you can clear them with engineering units, engineers, if you have them. The Americans do. Finally, here, this is really a cool part of the game. These are effectively damage markers, but they're named disorganized markers. So there's 4 levels. Again, the background is about which side you're on. You put this on the hex. They actually affect the entire hex, not per unit. So if you're in a hex with that marker and you move a unit with a better state of disorganization into that, it actually inherits the marker. So you go from 1 to 4, and as you see, you get task quality, move, and combat negatives because of the state of disorganization you are in. Also, there is kind of a 5th blank marker here, which means that if you go beyond level 4, you actually start to lose units from the hex. So for each level beyond 4 that you suffer, each time you're hit, you'll actually lose a company or a unit from the hex under these markers. So this is quite a critical part of the system, and it's really about how the damage is accrued here. So as you can see with the company units, the flip, which is normally a weaker side, is actually deployed or column. And then we have 2 extra markers here. Now these are in addition to these. So they are suppressed and pinned. Suppressed is kind of the nasty version, and pinned is the not so nasty version, although they're both quite bad. So the pin marker, you can't move, and you lose 3 strength from the hex. And suppress means you can't move and you can't fire, and also you have a task quality problem. Now these markers can be in addition to these, so you can really mess up a hex if you have these and these. Suppressed happens when you roll a 0 on the combat table, so that's the automatic hit level. So 0 is the smallest amount of damage you get on the combat chart, because it's the lowest number. The numbers get higher because as you have a combat factor that you're rolling against, you want to be as close to that combat factor to get the best damage possible, and 0 is kind of your base number. However, 0 does give us a suppressed, which is it's a pretty bad thing to have on your unit. Pinned, however, is a result of a route check. So you also get a result of R on the combat table, and the R result means you have to do a route check, and that's against your troop quality, modified with defense values and terrain values, etc. And you roll against that, and if you pass, get lower than that number, then you're okay. If you fail, two things happen. It depends whether you're deployed or whether you're in column. If you're deployed, you get a pin marker. If you already had a pin marker, you change up to a suppressed marker. However, if you're in column, you do a thing called you route, and effectively what you do is you bug out from where you were, and you end up back with your HQ, which is fine as long as your HQ exists and is on the board. If it's not available, you will actually just remove the unit. It will break up completely and disappear from the game. So routing is quite important, and as you can see, troop quality amounts can actually affect your route check as well. So your units can go south really, really quickly if they get repeatedly lumped upon. Something to effect of that is that there is a new rule on the system which I found on Board Game Geek, which is concerning the artillery here. Is that if there's a kind of, if you like, a gamey tactic, which is you lump all your artillery units onto one hex and just flatten it. If you see what I mean, you can stack up DG markers and route rolls, and you can effectively just start removing units by concentrating, and you get this effect of a kind of death ray artillery use. So there's a new rule that's come out that says that if you have a barrage marker in the hex, you can't attack it with an indirect unit which would cause a smaller or equal barrage. So if you had a medium barrage, you couldn't fire a 2, 3 or 4 factor artillery at it until that barrage is gone. You could only attack it with a 5. Now this is very, very new, so I'm going to try it out here and see how it works. Seems a little gamey in its own right, but we'll see. But I can see that, and having actually sort of done a couple of practice sessions, I see this sort of artillery death ray thing as being a little bit of a problem with the system. So that's really the counters as is. What I'll just move across to and zoom out are the charts here. So we have the records chart. So here we have date, time, and victory point track. This is kind of general records track here. And then of course we have the weather table, which we roll for every day. Beyond that, we have these are the displays, the divisional displays. So there's two here. I've overlapped one with the other. There's a track under each of them, but I'm using one track and combining it just for space reasons. And we have an Imperial Army one, a Navy one. We have a 2nd Marine Division and a 4th Marine Division. So each have their own little boxes here. And you actually get your command ratings, dispatch ratings, etc. from here. Your routed units, which come off the board, go here. Your support weapons, whether they're reallocating or they're available, move in these boxes. And you have a few other boxes if you're lucky. Here we've got divisional truck pools and core truck pools, and also where you can put heroes. So there are included heroes in the game. You can see one here at the moment, which do a one-off thing in the game if you want to use that hero. It's not a hero as in you stick him on the board and he does things, modifies your troops. It's just a one-time task unit, which is called a hero. Okay, and then the general records track. This is where you keep your fatigue points, your dispatch points, your casualties, your troop quality, and your direct commands. So we run up the track here. There's limits here. Maximum dispatch points is 9. Maximum command points is 19. Other than that, it's up to you what you want to do. So yeah, those are the charts there, and we've looked at the terrain effects chart. So this is the only other chart in the game, which is pretty much it's one of those busy player aids. I'll just lay it out here, and I'm not going to go through all the tables, but as you can see in the bottom there, you've got the bombardment effectiveness. So does it land in the right hex? We have the random events table. We have the combat table here, combat results table, and as you can see, there's these colours. So you use the band that whatever you're firing with. This is indirect fire. And it's this side for firing at the hex, and that's usually against infantry. If you're firing at a hard target, that would be a tank or an amphibious landing vehicle or something like that. Then you use this side, which is a much cleaner, but you're only actually attacking one unit, and that will never be infantry. It'll always be something like a tank or a vehicle or something like that. So that's the combat chart here. There's your zeros, which give you the S, which is the suppressed, and here you can see the R markers and the number of DG markers, which is the disorganized markers that happen. If you roll over the number that you're looking for in the combat, of course, you miss completely. So we have assault modifiers as well, and I'll go through assault when we actually do one, but it's like a concentrated fire combat that one side or the other will disappear on it. And we've got an abbreviated sequence of play, and there's some modifiers for combat. The weather table appears here as well, and activity summary. So when you pull a chit, what can you do with those chits? And that's about it on the charts and tables. So we've got that. And the terrain effects modifier, and that's all your charts and tables. So, in comparison to things like Gallipoli, etc., there's not these streams of extra charts to go through. Right. Well, I think that's enough for one video as an intro, and then we'll set up for the scenario, and I'll just run through the scenario at the beginning of turn one on that. But that's it for now, and it's this CSS Tinian, the Forgotten Battle. Hopefully giving you a decent explanation of what you need to do, and what it plays like, and hopefully I'll see you for the first turn, the setup and the first turn. Bye for now.